Hello, everyone. Welcome to Psychedelic Insights. I'm here with my colleague Adam Tabero, and we have the pleasure of having Jonathan Sabbagh, CEO of Journey Clinical, here with us today. How are you, Jonathan?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Of course, thank you for coming on. So we'll just get right into it right now with the first question. Can you tell us about the mission of Journey Clinical and how the company enables psychotherapists to offer ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in their own private practices?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking that great question. So, at a high level, I got into this work because I had PTSD and I started working with psychedelics in relation with a therapist. And it really helped me out to sort of like get better from PTSD and also to live a more normative life. And actually, I eventually went back to school to study psychology to do this. And so that's how we got to doing Journey. But all that to say that it's a very mission driven company and that I firsthand experienced how important it is to have therapists involved in this process. And so when we built Journey Clinical, what we look to do is to expand access to psychedelic assisted psychotherapy by empowering licensed mental health professionals to incorporate these treatments in their practice as an adjunct to therapy. And so what we found was that the barrier to entry for therapists to do that was really to form and maintain relationships with prescribing physicians. There's not that many of them. There's actually only 25,000 psychiatrists in America. They're
Hmm.
mostly located in large cities, and there's an equal shortage of nurse practitioners. And so, when they're trying to do this, these relationships can be fickle and hard to form. And so it puts a lot of pressure on the cost for the patient. It limits the revenue potential for the therapist. And so it really forces them, for the most part, to refer out. And I'm sure if you guys are in therapy, if you're having the most cathartic experience of your life with someone you never met, or maybe an app, that's just not great.
Yep.
And so, to understand what we're doing at Journey, it's really important to understand that we're not a ketamine clinic. We're not, developing simply a direct-to-consumer ketamine offering. What we've built actually is the necessary infrastructure for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy to exist. And the way we do that is by structuring it through a telehealth platform where we have a collaborative care model and we take on the therapy the medical part of CAP, while our member licensed mental health professionals take on the therapy. And so practically how it works is they become members of Journey. They refer their patients to our in-house medical team. We see those patients for an hour intake. If they're eligible, we'll send them enough for 2 CAP sessions. And those CAP sessions can be delivered in a variety of protocols. We have 6 running right now, all the way from at home to in person to group to retreat formats. And then they'll come back for dose adjustments and we'll see them regularly. We're also basically becoming the in-house doctor of these therapists. And so that's really, I think, the power of what we're doing is that, they're basically getting access to a world-class medical team on call 24/7 when there's a difficult experience for the patient, but also to build a collaborative relationship where we're able to do bespoke treatment plans at scale for their patients. So we're really basically supporting the therapist for them to expand their practice and incorporate psychedelic assisted psychotherapy as an adjunct to their therapy practice for their patients. And all this is tech enabled. We have a portal where there's an EMR for our prescribers. We have a whole member portal with education, Fluence designed a 22 module education platform for us with CE credits. There's a lot of peer-to-peer dynamics, community offerings. We help with legal resources, and it's all HIPAA compliant, so they can refer their patients through our portal, track outcomes, and communicate with our medical team. And then we have a patient portal. So, today, it was really amazing to see that we opened up our membership in February of last year with 30 member therapists, and we have now 1,000 therapists in our network. We've seen, about 3,000 patients during that time, and we've administered, or not we, but our member therapists have administered more than 6,000 CAP sessions during that period. And we've seen 93% of our patients or of their patients report improved outcomes in their self-report measures. So it's really, really an amazing adventure to go through.
Wow. Thank you so much for that very comprehensive answer. And I would just like to say it's always great to speak with people who have been personally touched by psychedelic medicine in this field, just doing work in this field. So we'll move on to the next question. Can you tell us a bit about the psychotherapists who use the platform? Are they mostly clinical psychologists, LCSWs, licensed mental health counselors? Who's primarily using this platform on the therapy side?
Yeah, great question. There's a large spectrum of people that use our platform, going from LCSWs, LMFTs to psychologists. So we really have pretty much all of the licensure types that exist in the Journey Clinical Network. And what's really awesome is that they all interact together, and their various level of experience, they support each other. So, these people now have access to 1,000 people, community of peers of various licensures and locally, who can, meet up and get together and support each other.
Wow. Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. We'll move on to the next question. We understand that Journey Clinical will have patients sent ketamine lozenges to bring to their therapy sessions. Can you explain the difference between the intensity of a ketamine experience with a lozenge compared to IV? What are the benefits of each delivery method, in your opinion?
Yeah, the main difference, or the main two differences between a sublingual administration of ketamine and an IV or an intramuscular injection are bioavailability. So bioavailability for IV is about 100%. For intramuscular, you're looking at somewhere between 95 to 98%. Intranasal, you're looking at roughly 50%, depending on how you point the nasal spray. Sublingual, if you don't swallow, you're looking at something like 10%. So, from there, the dosing needs to be adjusted to, if the patient needs, a higher dose, or we always start with a weight-based dose and then go from there. But that's the main difference. The other difference is essentially the how fast acting it is, and so the peak to valley, or of the experience, right? How you get to a peak experience with IM or IV, it's within minutes, versus an intranasal is a bit faster, but on a sublingual, you're looking at about roughly 20 minutes to feel the effects of the medicine, and you're looking at about a roughly 90-minute experience, which is pretty common for both sublingual and IM.
So how I understand, when someone's going for IV ketamine therapy, you get dropped into a very significant psychedelic headspace pretty quickly. So in regards to the lozenges, how intense is that psychedelic experience that you're trying to get people to?
I mean, I think it's not reasonable to look at intensity of experience. Some people want to have, first of all, when you're doing an IV infusion, there's no psychedelic therapy happening, right? It's usually like an IV infusion. You're going to get an infusion and you're going home. Here we work very specifically within the context of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. That means that we work with preparation, with dosing and integration. And so we follow that model for everything that we do. It has to be within the context of a therapeutic alliance. And so when we're working that way, some people want a psychedelic dose, some people want a psycholytic dose. We have a couples cap protocol, for example, where people want to have a more conversational interaction. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. And then it also depends on, the patient's reaction to the medicine. Some people have a very strong reaction to a reasonably low dose. And some people, need more medicine, to have a reaction. I was chatting with Gita Vaid the other day, and her theory, which I think is true, is that, some people with high strong defenses might need a stronger dose of ketamine to be able to work through those defenses, whereas some people might be more sensitive to the medicine and need less. So I think this idea and ethos of needing to have a really strong psychedelic experience should be challenged a little bit. And when you have medicine in you, something's happening, right? You are having an effect. The drug is having an effect on your brain, and working with preparation a lot to actually sit with that experience and experience it is a large part of psychedelic therapy. And so that's really important, I think, to understand. Now, to answer your question in terms of matching bioavailability, well, as I told you, there's a notion of bioavailability that comes into play. And so you can reach similar levels of bioavailability by increasing the dose, but it's not the idea is not to have a huge hype. At least that's not what we're doing. The idea is not to have a huge psychedelic experience. For us, it has to be in service of the therapy session, and it has to be in service of the patient's recovery. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that we're having a huge experience. It means that we're having an experience within the context of psychedelic therapy, that it's working with the patient, that it's done within the context of a medical model, that it's agreed upon. We have 2 dosing sessions that are on a lower dose to assess how the patient reacts to the initial dose. Then we come back for dose adjustment. So we do things very thoughtfully here. And that's our approach. We have a medical model, and we do work within the context of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy.
And how often are they coming in for the sessions, for example?
Well, that's a great question, right? So we don't believe there's a cookie cutter approach to it. We'll start with those 2 dosing sessions. In some patients, we'll do it twice a month. Some will do a little more. And that's why we have follow-up consultations at a minimum every 3 months to assess if the patient is still eligible. And so we work in collaboration with the therapist to build a bespoke treatment plan for each patient to make sure that it still makes sense. And so it's not, you're getting prescribed or sent a bunch of ketamine every month. We are here having a treatment plan that's developed in the context of therapy and psychedelic assisted psychotherapy with the patient, and they'll have a treatment plan that's agreed and proposed by the prescriber, and then they'll do, let's say, 2 sessions or 3 sessions a month for a while, and then come back at least at a minimum in 3 months for a follow-up consultation. They have to have a full follow-up consultation to assess how the treatment's going. They have to re-administer measures. So we're really diligent about basically building bespoke treatment plans. So you can almost think of it as a concierge mental health at scale.
Thank you, Jonathan. And that was actually very interesting to hear about how the first 2 sessions they see how the patient reacts to the ketamine first. I thought that was very interesting, and I didn't know about that. So this next question I have for you, I've actually been really looking forward to asking this one. Have you ever had a scenario where a patient wanted to do ketamine-assisted psychotherapy with their current therapist who had no previous training in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy? Then maybe they told them about Journey Clinical, and then it led to this therapist receiving training.
Absolutely. We actually have a whole track for patients referring their therapist. And it's a very common ask, right? Where basically a lot of patients are now interested in this treatment. And as you're really correctly pointing it out, you want to do this with someone that you know. That's why we're here. We want to make sure that you can remain with your therapist and they can integrate this offering in their practice. And so we've got a number of patients that have referred their therapist. And so because of the very comprehensive model that we've developed, they have a whole education offering through Fluence that they go through. Then we have peer consultation groups. Then they can have an experiential. Then they have peer-to-peer offerings. So there's a lot of support for them to get started. And we've had therapists that were novices to psychedelics who got started from scratch with Journey and who now have thriving practices. And we help them every step of the way. They have weekly meetings with our medical team available, and they have an on-call medical team.
Wow. Yeah, that's really awesome. I know that if I was going in for psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, ketamine assisted psychotherapy, I would really want my therapist to know my background. And this is why I was so interested in your company, Journey Clinical, because I just think that is just so important. Like, do people really want to go to a clinic, meet someone for the first time and just spill out all of their trauma to them? Maybe I'm sure it can work, but this seems to me like it would be the best method to see someone who really knows you. So that's really cool.
Thank you.
The next question I have for you is,
and then one thing I'll add to that is that, what we really feel good about in our model is that it's a non-extractive model, right? It's a virtuous circle where if our member therapists do well, our company does well. And so we're really happy to have them keep most of the revenue and build their practice, and we're there to be their partner.
Wow. That's great. Adam, you have any questions on that or no?
So in regards to the therapists that are allowed to be enrolled in Journey in your model, is it just therapists? What is the minimum requirement?
Yeah, that's a very important question. We only work with licensed mental health professionals. They have to have a license or be under supervision to get their license. There's a reason for that. They've done all of these years learning how to be a therapist. It takes a really long time. You have to have experience and diplomas and get a master's at a minimum. It's really hard. They studied for a long time and practiced for a long time to get there. So that makes them uniquely equipped to do so. On top of that, these are people who have a license, who answer to a licensing board. And for us, that really greatly improves the standard of care that we deliver to our patients. It doesn't mean that there's not awesome healers out there who are on the ground. I wish you know for a fact, I've done a lot of ayahuasca and it's helped me and changed my life. But in our model, that felt like the way to go for the medical model that we've supported.
Okay, great. So we understand that you have a partnership with Fluence in order for therapists to receive training. How long is the Fluence training that therapists receive? And can you tell us a little bit about what the therapists learn from these courses?
Sure. So Fluence designed a whole didactic training module that we offer asynchronously through our portal. And that's part of the membership. It's 22 modules, and they go through, what is ketamine, ideas of preparation, of dosing and integration, how to handle difficult experiences, kind of like the sort of like basics of what psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is. We actually have a second 22 module offering, which is on premise and promise of psychedelic therapy, which also is developed by Fluence, and they get CE credits for that. But on top of that, again, what we have is we've got a lot of content and other offerings that we propose. So there's, peer consultation groups offered by other members. They can experience CAP through Journey Clinical. We've got, webinars weekly from SMEs like Sunny Strasberg, who works with Dick Swartz on IFS and CAP. Lauren Toast does webinars for us. We've got a ton of content that comes out on scope of practice and consent to touch. We've got a 4-hour webinar on consent to touch because it's really important, right, to know how to behave in those circumstances and not to behave inappropriately, especially when somebody is in a very influenceable state. So we really offer a very comprehensive program to people to have access to ongoing learning with us as well.
That's great. It sounds like there's a lot of continuing education. So that's awesome. So with MDMA assisted therapy, a lot of the talk therapy is done during all the sessions, including the dosing sessions. With psilocybin, it seems that a lot of the talk therapy seems to be done before and after the dosing session. So what is the process like in the case of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy?
It's a great question. It depends probably on the intention that you're looking to achieve in the dose. MDMA is a very specific compound, right? It is an amphetamine, so you are naturally more talkative when you're under the influence of MDMA versus psilocybin, where you tend to go more inward. So that the drug definitely has an impact on how your experience goes. But then the dosage also has an impact, right? So if you're going at a psycholytic dose with ketamine, you can have a more interactive experience with your therapist where you can be more talkative. If you're going on a more psychedelic dose or a higher dose, then the tendency would likely be to go more inward, have an eye mask, do the music, and then kind of have a lot of conversation on the tail end of the experience. Like some things that are really interesting with ketamine is because it's a dissociative anesthetic, it does have a disembodying effect pretty quickly. And at least I've found this in my own experience with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, that when you sort of start to re-embody or come out of it, I think there's a bottom-up process that occurs where you kind of get knocked out of dissociation on top of the lowered defenses and the increased neuroplasticity. And so a lot of patients have reported very cathartic moments at the end of the experience. But both are useful. Like I said, you can do couples CAP, and you want to definitely be more present and have a conversation with your therapist. And all of that, we've done all this. We're going to be set up for MDMA and psilocybin as they come online. So that's also what we're working towards.
Yes, and we definitely wanted to ask about that, and also maybe perhaps the REMS protocol around that. And but those are all my questions. Thank you. I'm going to pass it off to Adam here.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. So how are adverse events handled in someone's private practice? A clinical psychologist or an LCSW, for example, does not have a medical degree. How does Journey Clinical ensure that patients are taken care of properly in the case of an adverse event?
Very important question. Let's start with scope of practice. All right. So the scope of practice of a therapist is to deliver therapy, and that's what they're doing in this case. They're delivering a therapy session. The scope of practice of our in-house medical team is to assess if a patient is eligible to be prescribed a controlled substance, which is ketamine, off-label, and to self-administer that substance, that period, basically, right? We do it in the context of therapy, but that's the scope of practice. So in terms of medical legal risk, Journey Clinical is taking on all of that medical legal risk, and the therapists are simply doing a therapy session.
Okay.
Simple way to compare the scope of practice question is a patient is on Suboxone or any other kind of medication that alters your consciousness. One could argue that SSRIs do it as well. And they're having a therapy session. There is no real difference there, and there is nothing to log specifically in that context. So that's just something to call out about how this works. Now, from that perspective, we are very diligent in doing our intake of the patients of, if we need to do medical clearances, for example, we'll do them if they have, things like cystitis, or, we'll screen out for a number of counterindications. And if necessary, we'll have them have their primary care practitioners offer clearances for the treatment. We've got a whole webinar on what makes a good referral. We've got a lot of access to our medical team, and they can, just call us basically if they have a question or something goes on. In the case where an adverse event happens, what will be calling a 911 if there's really an issue. But what we do is we're also there. So there's a number that they call, and we'll get on the phone with them. Our medical team will get on the phone. We'll help them walk through that experience. We'll triangulate with the patient and the therapist to make sure that everything is going all right, and then follow up with them after that. So we're basically supporting them all the way. They have an on-call medical team. What I can tell you is that, sometimes people have difficult experiences, which are working through some difficult material, but we've never had a real any kind of medical emergency. We've got it to this day that every kind of difficult experience that we've worked through, they often turned out to be actually opportunities for the therapist and the medical team to work through these experiences with the patient and actually have them thrive after that. But one thing is clear is that basically what they're getting with Journey Clinical is the same level of support as if they were hospital system. They've got a world-class medical team. Our medical director, Kyle, is an MD PhD from Albert Einstein, who's got 25 years of experience and who oversaw a MAP site. Our lead clinician is MAPS and site clinician in New York. We've got 30 medical professionals working for us. Each receive 20 hours of training when they join us. So it's a very robust and comprehensive system that really supports the therapist and the patient when, sometimes difficult materials come up.
Understood. Thank you. So do you guys, does Journey Clinical track the long-term effectiveness of these therapies in any way?
100%. We administer measures at intake and on an ongoing basis. So we've got thousands of data points of all of our patients. And as I said, 93% of our patients have reported improved outcomes since we've started.
Wow.
And this is with, you said 1,000 therapists currently using the Journey Clinical platform?
1,000 therapists and like more than 3,000 patients at this point.
Gotcha. That's quite a number. All right. So do you guys see a future where psilocybin-assisted therapy and MDMA-assisted psychotherapy will be able to fit into the model being used by Journey Clinical? You touched on this a little earlier.
Yeah, that's the whole point, right? So we're basically, as I said, we're not a ketamine company. We're building back-end infrastructure for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy to exist. Without this infrastructure, it cannot happen. And so, our plan is 100% to integrate MDMA when it comes online in the next year or two, and then psilocybin after that, and whatever we're drug agnostic, right? So whatever compound comes out, we're building for that. And so if we need to slightly amend our infrastructure to do so, that will be fine.
So I got a question here. I know that the FDA, I think they released some guidance on what they're looking for, at least in these clinical trials, and I read through it. It says that they want 2 therapists there. Do you think there will be a time when one therapist will work out fine and the FDA will be okay with that?
At this point, there is no clear REMS
Okay.
on what the REMS are going to be.
Got it.
Currently, in the clinical trials, they have 2 therapists that are there, 2 PhDs, if I'm not mistaken, that are present during the MDMA session. It's also clinical trials. So, there is currently conversation between MAPS and the FDA on what the REMS are going to look like. And so, I'm guessing that they're going to want to make this as accessible as possible, right? Having 2 PhDs present is probably not very affordable for people. So, they're definitely going to they're going to be advocating for flexibility probably there. And we'll see what comes out. But whatever comes out, we'll be ready to support our therapists, to give them access to all of the medicine and the training and all the infrastructure they need.
This question is just a slight tangent, but I had been reading about shortages of racemic ketamine. Have you guys experienced anything like this, and in terms of how you're sourcing your ketamine and whatnot? If you can give us any insight into this.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it pops up on listservs here and there from time to time, and there are some providers, one specifically, that decided not to supply certain medical offices who are administering lozenges with ketamine. It's not the same thing as wholesale distributors and large compounding pharmacies who supply organizations like ours. So there's a difference between access to ketamine for some like direct to some doctor offices and some larger providers. So we don't have any issue with having access to ketamine, and I'm imagining that other companies don't either. And there are other sources of ketamine than that specific company that can take on that.
Understood.
Like just so you know, like ketamine is one of the most used drugs in the world, right? So there is like the WHO has put it on the top 10 drugs to be had at all times. It's commonly used in pediatrics and in emergency rooms for anesthesia. So this is a drug that's widely available.
Yeah, all right, I understand. Thank you for the perspective there.
Of course.
So to build on this even further, earlier in the year there was all this. We were hearing a lot about telehealth and how there might be a bill put into place that can put an end to telehealth. Is this something that you guys are following closely? Will this impact you guys in any way? And what are your thoughts on that moving forward?
Yeah, of course. So the whole industry has been following that. What you're referring to is the Ryan-Haight Act. And so that was the Ryan-Haight Act was a regulation that was put in place, I think something like 14 years ago by the DEA to ensure that, a young man called Ryan Haight was died of an overdose because he was prescribed opiates through a compounding pharmacy without a doctor. And so it was made to basically dismantle pill mills. They had on their desk the DEA to, create a license for telehealth companies for those past 14 years, which actually took some time to come through. Ultimately, during the PHE being the public health emergency due to COVID, those regulations were lifted. And so millions of people in America got access to these treatments remotely, and it became really the norm. And it's not just ketamine, it's, Adderall and medication to treat opiate addiction and a number of other controlled substances. So this a lot of people have come to rely on this. And the Biden administration, I think it was like a month, or like said that on May 11th, the PHE would be ending. And so they came out with proposed new guidelines for, the prescription of controlled substances via telehealth. And those new guidelines basically require a referral from a medical professional, not a prescription, but a referral. And so they opened those new guidelines for commentary once they put them out, and they received 38,000 comments that were all mostly in favor of having more flexible guidelines. And so the DA did something pretty amazing, actually, is that they took those guidelines into consideration. They recognized that they needed to come back and have a more comprehensive offering based on the need that this type of offering, like telehealth, is offering to the millions of people in America. And so they extended the PHE exemption until November, when they're going to come back with what we expect is going to be more flexible guidelines. That being said, we were ready for the guidelines of the PHE on May 11th, and that would have not disrupted our BAU at all. So we were ready for that. We had built for that, and so we'll be ready when the new guidelines come into play.
Good to know. You guys are prepared. So people are very vulnerable while under the influence of a psychedelic. In these one-on-one sessions, what measures are put into place to make sure both the therapist and the client are safe?
Very important question. So the number one thing is that we work with licensed mental health professionals, right? These are people who have years of training, years of experience, and have a license that they need to answer to a licensure board with. And so that already creates a tremendous barrier to entry to who is going to be able to work with those treatments in our network. On top of that, we provide them with training. We have, as I said, consent to touch trainings, and they have peer consultation groups. And what I can tell you about psychotherapists is that they are not the adventurous type. They're actually more concerned about doing the right thing, about protecting their license, and about giving the highest standard of care to their patients. And so it's not about, it's rarely about telling them that they're doing too much, but more about giving them the courage to get started, because they already have all these amazing tools. And so we've got this amazing network of people that are very, very mindful on how they approach this treatment and really care about the standard of care for their patients.
Got you. Understood. So that's all for my questions. If Jake has any more, if you could feel free to ask. This was one thought I wanted to leave off with, because we were talking to Journey Clinical. So in general, when you kind of look at the landscape of psychedelic investing, or just psychedelics in general for mental health purposes, I feel like ketamine doesn't get nearly enough attention in regards to some of the other bigger psychedelics, when the reality is ketamine is here right now. You can go get ketamine therapy. It's available. It's medicinally legal, and it's extremely, extremely effective. So I just kind of, part of my perspective is I'm just unsure. I have a feeling that ketamine is going to have its moment in the sun at some point very soon. But it's just surprising to me that it's not getting nearly enough, as much attention as some of the other psychedelics that are being pushed through FDA trials are right now.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, because ketamine is basically the main psychedelic that's available. And even for other psychedelics, like, it might take time. There are longer sessions. Like, there's a lot of barriers to entry for them to be widely accepted. So I think, or widely adopted. So I think that's true. One thing I will leave you with is that, we're one of the few companies, I think, that was funded by, a tier 1 investor like Union Square Ventures. And so, we have seen traditional investors actually have real interest in delivery and distribution mechanisms for psychedelics who use ketamine. And so that is a very encouraging prospect. And it's been, they are great partners, of course, but we've had from the start, actually, pretty traditional investors working with us because of the approach that we've taken.
Gotcha. One last thing before I let you go. How long does it take to come down off the lozenge? So let's say you do a session, you've taken the lozenge. After the therapy session is over, how long until you are back to kind of feeling sober?
About 90 minutes.
90 minutes? All right, cool. So in total, how long does that session take from start to end?
Like 2 hours, I think, would be
2 hours.
Thing. I think from the time you get there, that you take the ketamine, it's about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, right? If you want to be safe.
All right, got you. All right, cool. That's all the questions from me. I really appreciate having you on, Jonathan. Jake, do you have anything else to add?
No, just, I've been following Journey Clinical on social media for maybe a year and a half. I remember the post saying, listen, we have like 200 therapists on the platform, and to see that you guys already have 1,000 therapists, and it's just really incredible. And I'm a big fan of the work you're doing, and just like to thank you for coming on today with us.
Well, no, thank you. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. Happy to be here.
Awesome.
All right, awesome. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want more content like this, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.